I said I was sorry, sorry.
Hello and welcome to Intoxicated Masculinity. We're talking about drinking culture, pop culture, religious culture, and anything else that comes up. Joining me as always is Brandon,
Hello, my people.
Kale,
Hi.
and Jim.
Hello, everybody.
All right, today we are going to talk about apologetics, and I'm going to unapologetically first talk about what we're drinking. Brandon, what are you having tonight?
I am having a thing called a calimocho. It's a Spanish drink that is equal parts red wine and Coke. It was made in the 1920s when a Coca-Cola plant first opened in Spain, and it's kind of meant to be drunk with like bad red wine because it's kind of a proletariat drink. You know, it's with what they had. So
you're saying you wouldn't put fine wine with Coca-Cola? I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, what are you having?
Well, unlike Brandon's traditionally cocaine-laced drink, I am having Old Forester 100 because I thought if we're going to talk about something deep, I'm going to need something serious. So,
Sounds good. Jim?
I'm having a very basic gin and tonic.
Sounds like a plan. I was trying to think of something that related, and I couldn't really. So I'm having a nice little Armagnac.
I mean, you could have done like water and wine.
I feel like that's a little easy. Although cognac is a brandy, which is made from grape or from wine distillate, so it's sort of wine, just better. All right, Brandon, why don't you get started off? Go ahead, Kale. I'm sorry.
I was going to say I've literally put milk and honey in my coffee before. It was pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's Jim drinking?
He already said he's having a gin and tonic. Anyway.
Sorry, Jim. I always forget.
All right. So Brandon's going to kind of take over here. We're talking about apologetics, and I'll kind of hop in with questions here and there or responses or whatever, but I think Brandon's going to get us started off. So why don't you go ahead and do that getting us started off thing?
All right. Well, in the world of Christian theology, there's essentially two types of people. There's the people who just believe on faith, and you know they have some personal revelation, or they were raised in the faith, or whatever, and they don't formulate like logical arguments for it. It's just something they feel is correct, and that's just it. They don't feel the need to bring any evidence. They don't feel the need to try and convert atheists or have debates or anything like that. On the other spectrum is Christian apologetics, and there is many apologetic arguments for the existence of God. There's a handful that kind of come around. There's the cosmological, the ontological, the argument from design, the teleological. This one we're going to talk about tonight is the Kalam Cosmological, which is a version of the cosmological formulated by a man named William Lane Craig. And anybody who's familiar with atheist versus Christian debates have almost certainly heard him say it. But I will put it out there as he formulates it. The argument is: premise one, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise two, the universe began to exist. Premise three, therefore the universe has a cause. And given that conclusion, he says the universe has a cause, which is number four. Number five, if the universe has a cause, then an uncaused personal creator of the universe exists who, without the universe, is beginningless, changeless, immaterial, timeless, spaceless, and enormously powerful. Therefore, an uncaused personal creator of the universe exists who, without the universe, is beginningless, changeless, immaterial, timeless, spaceless, and enormously powerful. And then he goes on from there. This mostly it's to argue for a God. A lot of people will point out that it really only gets you to a kind of deistic beginner God. And William Lane Craig is very much a Christian, so he then formulates it in ways or uses other arguments to help build it towards the Christian argument, but that's not really where the Kalam itself goes from there.
I think first of all, and I think this is kind of important, when you look at things like this is sort of a, he has various premises and then a conclusion that leads from those. And so for me, and I don't know, other people that, are interested in argumentation or interested in breaking down these kind of arguments, for the conclusion to be true, the premises has to be accurate. I intentionally, Brandon has passed us out some videos to watch before this. I'll include those in the description below. I did not watch the rebuffs because I kind of wanted to, have them stew on my own, and I'll get into what I thought about those. But so Brandon sort of mentioned the three. Was it three opening premises or two?
Yeah, three opening ones. Yeah.
So in other words, for his conclusion to be accurate, all three of those premises have to be accurate. Would you say that's true?
Yes. For the for the conclusion to be, I mean, you can have a valid argument without the premises being true. But I think, what is it? Sound. You can't have a sound argument if the premises aren't true.
So do you want to just start off with the first one and kind of talk about that, or how do you want to proceed?
Well, I mean, I would say first, does Kale or Jim have anything to say about what I just read, or you want me to reread? We'll just go with the first premise, or what?
Yeah, I think why don't you reread the first one, and then we'll kind of take them one at a time.
Okay.
Because again, like we said, for an argument to be valid, the premises all have to be accurate and support the conclusion, right?
Yes. Okay.
Right.
The first one, everything that begins to exist has a cause.
I'll let Jim or Kale go first. I have some thoughts on this too, though.
So I have a lot of different thoughts about this. One of the thoughts that I had was, if you took this entire argument and you took out the word universe and put in God, like, I don't think you get very many Christians to agree that whatever begins to exist has a cause. So if God began to exist, God must have a cause, right? It presupposes that God is infinite, although it seems like he goes to a great length to argue that infinity isn't a valid thing. But if you're going to say that God exists in an infinite way, God has infinite ability to create the universe, I don't understand how you can then turn around and, in my mind, if that's your conception of God, how you can turn around and say God is limited to making a finite universe. Like, if God's infinite, why can't God make an infinite universe? So that was my first thought.
Yeah, I think I actually I agree with that, but I think I would take one step in the other direction and say, how do we know that an infinite universe can't just exist? It's one of those things. I think that we have this idea, and I think we as finite beings have sort of a inborn bias against the infinite, because infinite is literally impossible for us to understand. It's impossible for us to wrap our head around the idea of the infinite. And just because we don't understand the infinite and can't really conceive of it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I mean, that's sort of like saying, well, I can't build an iPhone, therefore an iPhone can't be built. Well, it can be. And I think the infinite is the same. Just because we have a hard time conceiving it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Kale, what do you have to say?
I totally agree with both of you. No, I think you're both on the right path there, because there are some, I guess you could call double standards. Because the argument that this being that lives outside of this existence, that's infinite, but it's finite, is beyond us. And like, I've been really, really chewing on this today, and the thing that kept coming through my mind, and I was going to try to say this till last, but I'm just going to put it out there. Just because something's miraculous, it just means it's misunderstood. you think that it's some amazing, unexplainable thing, but it's just because you just don't have the knowledge or the technology to understand it yet. It's beyond you because you don't get it. And eventually we'll get to a point where we get it. And then people will understand you don't need to just make up things to make yourself feel better.
So, Brandon, what is your sort of thoughts on that first premise?
Well, the first premise kind of has, a few problems with it, I think. One, it's always struck me as a little bit of special pleading. If you can have an infinite God, why take that extra step? If something has to be infinite, why not go with the thing we already know exists, the universe? Just because the Big Bang is the furthest back we can go, that might just be the beginning of our local presentation of the universe and not the beginning of the cosmos. It could also be that since time is an actual distinct construct with science or with space, that since time didn't exist before the Big Bang, it is technically infinite. It has been since time began. Also, what does it mean to have a being that does something prior to time? If I move my hand from here to here, then some interval of time has passed. What does it mean to be timeless? It's almost it's almost illogical to the point where you can't even grasp it. If God was in a null space, like zero space, and then decided to make something, then some interval of time existed at that point. There's other ones also. Energy, again, I was talking a few weeks ago on the gun debate one about not being a psychologist. I am in no way a scientist or a cosmologist or anything like that. But my understanding is that energy can't be created or destroyed, and that the equals part on equals MC squared goes both ways. Energy turns into matter, and matter can turn into energy. So it may be there was just always an infinite energy in a non-space.
Well, one of the things I saw in there, and this is these the little things that kind of bug me, is I saw the atheists say the universe has always existed. And I don't know any atheists that have said that definitively. I don't know that atheists talk about the beginning of time really much at all, because it's not, I mean, it's something that I think that there are certain things that right now I think are just not knowable. And I think sometimes there is the grasping of, well, scientists don't know this, therefore scientists will never know this, and therefore it cannot be known. And I don't think that's true. I think it's like, just because we don't know something now doesn't mean we'll never know it.
Well, and that's also the God of the gaps saying, well, the science doesn't know this, therefore my God fits in there. That's never been true. I mean, I can think of a spiritual answer that ended up having a natural cause, and I can think of a natural answer that ended up having a different natural answer, but I can think of any natural answer that ended up having a supernatural true answer. That it just doesn't go that way, really, at least historically. Not saying it couldn't,
except for Keith Richards being alive, but other than that.
So I was just going to say one of the other things that I wanted to say about this point is I feel like the statement presupposes the answer, because I feel like the most important word in there is begins. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. So it's presupposing that the universe began, that it's not infinite.
Yeah.
And what does it mean? Like, what does it mean for something to have a beginning? Like, in our common experience, we don't have any common experience with what's being proposed here, something from nothing. When we experience something beginning, it's always something from something else, a transformation. So that I don't know, one of the videos you sent, one of the examples, like there's a table. The table had a beginning, but the table didn't come from nothing. Right. There was a carpenter, there were nails, there was a tree, somebody cut down the tree, made wood, formed it into a table. So the table didn't just appear and start table time. There was something that happened before the table. And so I don't really understand the basis of the universe beginning and there has to be nothing. I mean, it's possible that there's nothing. I mean, I don't know that there wasn't nothing. I just think you don't know that there was nothing.
One of the arguments, there's versions of the cosmological argument that are not great. I mean, not that this one is really good, but it's probably William Lane Craig has a PhD. He's not an idiot, but there has been people calling into like the atheist experience who kind of flub it. And one of the things the guy said is nothing on one of the, I don't know if I linked this video, but a caller says something can't come from nothing. And they challenge that very first premise, like, we don't have a nothing to test. What does it mean to even have a nothing? We can't say anything about a nothing because we don't have a nothing. And if we had a nothing, it'd be a something, so we can't test it. It's a meaningless statement.
Well, nowhere in the universe is there actually nothing.
Right.
There's at least a little bit, tiny bit of something everywhere in the universe. And I mean, the other thing that I think, and I think they've sort of disproven this scientifically, but the idea of a universe that is constantly expanding and contracting, over and over again. Again, scientifically, I don't think that's necessarily on the money, but it's possible that in some other way that could be happening. The universe is constantly recreating itself and is infinite, but it is infinitely changing. So the idea of just sort of saying as your first premise that, the universe has to have a beginning. Can you read it one more time just so I have it clear in my head?
Everything that begins to exist has a cause.
Yeah, everything that begins to exist has a cause. So he doesn't even say everything that exists has a cause. Only everything that begins has a cause, which I think is kind of confusingly written to begin with. But again, we don't know that because say, for example, the universe is something that's constantly recreating itself. Well, that means so far we've seen 14 billion years of one of those iterations, which, if it is infinite, is a infinitely small fraction of that whole, which means it's sort of like, imagine being in a dark room, seeing one tiny square inch of floor in front of you and making a determination about how the entire house is built based on that one square inch of floor. And so, I mean, you can say, I don't think it's invalid to say maybe it was God. I don't begrudge anybody that faith or that, but to say that that's absolutely what it is, I think is not, intellectually honest.
Yeah, it's a kind of special pleading, I think. I mean, we can trace back our current iteration of the universe that we live in back to the first Planck time, the beginning of the Big Bang. But so what? That just means past that we don't know. And it's fine to say I don't know. It's fine to not know. Knowing is cumulative. Knowing always kind of comes later. All we can do is keep assembling facts and building on what we already know. We can't know everything all at once. We're not at the end of history or something.
I think the problem for a lot of people, though, is that people like confident answers, even if those answers are the wrong answers. Yeah. I was just talking to my brother. My brother-in-law's a doctor. And how people, if you walk into a doctor's office, say, hey, I've got this symptom, this symptom, this symptom, and the doctor says, you've got X, and just diagnoses you right away. Versus another doctor that says, well, it could be a few different things. We need to run some tests. That a lot of people have a tendency to trust that first doctor who said this confident thing, right out of the gate, even though that's probably not a very good doctor, because he should be taking his time. He should be studying all aspects of something. But I think people really enjoy somebody who is confidently confident.
That exact scenario was on a Penn and Teller episode, by the way.
There you go. Kale, do you have anything else to say about the first premise?
Well, you talk about time, you talk about existence, you talk about stuff and nothing. And so you have to consider there must be an observer at that point. And I mean, I jotted down some notes about the Big Bang, and like they've done studies and think maybe there's more than one Big Bang. And then other people say that it wasn't even a Big Bang, it was something else. It was like the Big Suck or something like that. And there's so many different theories, but that's the beauty of science, of natural things in the known universe, is that if it's disproven by more science. It's not just somebody saying this is that because. And quick, easy answers aren't generally the best answers.
Yeah, they're not going to get you.
And
And scientific theories are never wholly overthrown. Parts of it may turn out to be wrong, but I don't know that any time has ever happened where an entire scientific theory, which is made up of all the cumulative facts of whatever subject that is, I don't know that there's ever been a time where an entire scientific theory has been overthrown.
Brandon, would you say they evolve?
Well, certainly.
Jim, do you have anything else you want to say on this one?
Yeah, I don't want to get too far afield, but I thought this was an appropriate time to talk about the cosmology clip that I sent around. Kale said he watched it. I don't know if you guys had a chance to watch it. Kale, do you want to say a little bit about what you got out of that video? Or I can talk about it.
Well, when I first started watching it, I'll admit I was a novice to this. I didn't know who he was or what his argument was. I just thought, you said he was pertinent to this subject, so I checked it out. And like at first, I wasn't even sure exactly what his argument was. I was like, okay. And then it was like, oh, never mind.
Well, Penrose is a real scientist. Penrose, I didn't actually get a chance to watch it myself, but I think I've seen it before. I mean, he worked with Hawking on a lot of stuff. He's a legit brilliant person as far as I know, but
yeah, so there's not a ton of scientists that agree with him on this theory, but his kind of his thought experiment is, if there was something existed before the Big Bang, what would it be? And he said, well, if our universe started at a Big Bang and it's constantly expanding, at some point the universe is going to be all black holes. And then the black holes over Google years will evaporate. Yeah. And all that'll be left are protons. And at that point, you've lost all sorts of quantum information. And the universe is infinitely cold and infinitely big. But the really important part is the universe forgets, because the universe has to have a frame of reference. And when that data gets lost and it's just protons by themselves have no frame of reference. So something that's infinitely big and infinitely cold with no frame of reference is the same as infinitely small and infinitely hot. And so his theory is called conformal cyclic cosmology, where instead of the universe expanding and contracting and expanding and contracting, what happens is the universe expands infinitely and then it forgets how big it is, and a Big Bang happens.
Well, but I mean, what's along that point, I don't pretend to understand him, he's smarter than me, but what does it mean to be big without any reference?
That's exactly the crux of his theory, is when there is some frame of reference, it's big and cold, but at some point the universe there is no more frame of reference. The data gets lost. The black holes are all completely
If everything's
expended,
gone, then
and there's only protons left, and then the impetus for a Big Bang. So it's just an interesting thought experiment of how could it be that that there's a Big Bang, but maybe the universe is infinite. So he has one way of explaining how that could be. And I mean, who knows if he's right or wrong? No one really
Well,
knows.
Jim, can I tell you why I didn't completely follow him? Is because I agree with the expanding universe, and I understand the idea of heat death. I get that. And I just feel like maybe, like, because they talk about string theory and bubble theory, and I think part of, and because this all really ties together. I mean, I know I'm going off a philosophical diving board here, but the concept of infinity, the concept of God, and keep in mind they're concepts. Then you think about, this ever expanding universe and space-time, and you moving through space-time in this universe that's constantly expanding, constantly moving. You want to talk about, what is the present? Does the present exist? Does the future exist? You don't, and I know I'm kind of delving away from the God thing at this point, but I mean, it all kind of ties together. You got to consider this.
Well, William Lane Craig does. He has his own theory of time, and in his theory of time, I believe it is that the past and the future don't exist. It's just infinitely the present. I don't fully understand. I haven't read it. I've just heard people talk about it.
Well,
some people argue.
Brandon, would you want to move on with the second premise?
Sure.
Trying to keep things.
The second premise is pretty simple. The universe began to exist. And to me, well, maybe you don't want me to go first.
No, go ahead.
Well, to me, this goes back to Jim's point in the first one. Every example we have is something coming from something. The table came from molecules that existed before it entered into the shape of a table. William Lane Craig's body was composed of molecules long before it was clumped together and named William Lane Craig. I mean, it's everything has come from something. It's weird to then insist that only this one thing began to exist without coming from something else.
Exactly.
Well, it kind of seems. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, to me, it seems like if energy can't be created or destroyed, then there was always something there. But,
well, I mean, again, I think it almost seems like, to me anyway, that he has built the first premise so that he can have the second premise. Like none of these really seem based on anything. It seems more like, somebody just sat on their couch and said, well, everything that exists had a beginning, and therefore the earth had to have a beginning, and therefore God. And it's just like, doesn't seem super intellectually rigorous. It just kind of seems like something you could just think of.
Step 2 question mark.
Right. Just like,
it's like Mike was
the earth
saying
had a beginning
earlier,
because I said in my previous premise that everything had to have a beginning. I guess
that we're so constrained by our own mortality, our own limitations, that we just naturally believe. It's inbred into our society to believe that everything has this much time. You start here, you end here, and that's it. And that's the same for the earth. That's true. The same for the sun. That's true. But like time and existence, it's going to go on whether you're there or not. Whatever you're doing doesn't matter to everything else. But go on.
Jim.
I'm glad you brought up his conception of time, because I did not really. There was just one or two videos that just kind of touched on it. Because before he brought it up, one of the thoughts I had was, sometimes our thinking is so compartmentalized. Like, it's hard to conceive of an infinite past, but we don't think of a finite future, right? Like, if I said, when's the future going to end? Most people would be like, what are you talking about? There's always going to be future. Something at the end, there is no end, like something else happens.
Although to be fair, a lot of Christians would believe that there is an end, that they believe there is an end to.
Well, there's an end to
the worldly realm, anyway.
Right, but
although
not that everything's over.
That's interesting, because it doesn't suggest an end to everything, because clearly heaven still exists and hell still exists. I mean, they say it goes on for eternity. So even the Bible is recognizing some concept of infinity.
Yeah, and I think,
but only 6,000 people are getting in.
And even among Christians, some Christians would say, heaven isn't a place that's off somewhere. Heaven's going to be here on earth. Earth will be turned into heaven. But anyway, but we have a hard time conceiving of before. So if the future is infinite, why isn't the past infinite? To me, it seems like, shouldn't there be symmetry? That if the future is infinite, why isn't the past infinite?
Could I suggest one thing that I think if we just buy into the ultimate selfishness of human beings, it's because the past didn't have us, and we want the future to have us. That it's all sort of just based on this concept that, we want to be there forever in the future, and we know that in the past we weren't. So
right. Well,
and how many things it just basically lead back to human egotism, basically.
Well, I think it was.
Go ahead, Jim. I'm sorry, I interrupted, Jim. I apologize.
So I just wanted to say that this is slightly off topic, but it's we're talking about religion. This does have to do with beginnings and endings. One of the things that made me feel, gave me the most peace of mind about dying, and I don't know where I read it, was you don't spend any time worrying and fretting about you not existing before you were born, right? You don't think back and go, oh God, I didn't exist then. That's awful.
You don't worry about being dead before you were born.
Right. So why so much fear about this story coming to an end at some point?
Because we're the main characters.
Right. So that was something that gave me a little bit of comfort.
By the way, I hope you guys appreciate being side characters in my story.
Absolutely. We don't really exist when we're not on the screen. I mean,
no, obviously not.
Pop up.
Kiel, do you have anything to say about the second premise? I feel like the second premise, the first premise are very, very closely tied together. They're not like totally different things. But
could Brandon reread the second premise, please?
The universe began to exist.
Sounds like the first line of a really long book. The universe began to resist. Step one.
I think it's called Genesis.
That is a long book.
No, I mean, that's the question though, like your existence as an observer, your perception of the universe as it is may not even be correct. I mean, even if you're the smartest human being on earth,
and
you still might be wrong about that. And I think it's just better to just accept that, like finding out and like doing research and experimenting and, just seeing what's out there. I mean, that's science. Step A, fuck around. Step B, find out. Science. And whether the evidence shows that it correlates with your beliefs at the time or not shouldn't affect whether you tell people that's true. So I know I'm getting far afield here. Okay, so let's break it down easy. Is there a God? I don't know. Well, then you can't say that there's not a God. Well, you can't say that there is. He did this. He did what? Oh, what? Oh, wait a minute. No, that was the wind, or that was this, or that was some other natural cause.
But
that we just didn't.
This part of the argument
realize
hasn't
at the
even gotten to that part.
Was that Brandon?
What?
This part of that the argument hasn't even gotten to that part. All he is trying to say right now is that the universe began to exist, therefore it has a cause. We haven't even gotten to the part where he's saying, "Oh, it was God that was the cause."
Well, I think I don't know. Jim, are you satisfied to move on to the next premise? I think the next premise is probably where we'll again. I think the first two are very closely tied together, and we kind of talked about it a little bit when we were talking about the first one. Does that sound fair?
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to number 3 then, because I sort of have a lot to say about the conclusion. I find the premises to be unconvincing, but I think the conclusion bothers me even more.
The third premise is the universe no, that's second. Third is therefore the universe has a cause.
Well, actually, maybe my problems can be put right here. So again, even if we buy the first two premises, and if we think, I mean, even by the third premise, the universe did have a cause, that is assuming that it is an infinite, which seems like all three premises are basically saying the universe isn't infinite. The universe had a beginning and presumably would have an ending, although I don't know if he talks about the ending of the universe or not. But okay, so even if that's the case, as an argument for God, it doesn't really work for me, because all you're saying there is that means that something else is infinite. Now, is that Yahweh? Is that, Allah? Is that, I mean, one thing that a lot of the founding fathers believed in was this idea of a prime mover theory, that you had this sort of entity that existed outside of time that just went around starting universes, or universes. Or it was a giant pelican that just spat the earth out of its beak. I mean, really anything you put in this sort of prime mover is equally as likely as any other.
Well, that actually goes into his the ones after. This one is actually pretty. The year for the universe has a cause. Maybe, I mean, most things happen because some previous thing that happened. But here he's kind of sneaking in. He's using cause as like a label almost. Like,
right.
This has a cause. And then you're supposed to just in your head be like, well, somebody has to grant it a cause. It's not necessarily the case.
But it could be even if that's true, it could be anything. It literally could be anything, even if you grant that premise.
Right. Because if you had conceived that the universe was infinite, and we only have scientific theory for back to the Big Bang because we can't see back beyond that, then, you would say, sure, our universe we experience has a cause. It happened at the Big Bang, and before that there was something before that created the conditions for the Big Bang. We just don't know. We don't have any ability so far to know what that was.
Yeah, we get to our current limits of understanding.
Right. That doesn't mean it was ancient aliens. It could be
aliens.
Well, it doesn't. A wrong answer was always wrong. Like, even like before we knew about germs, it wasn't true that it was demons making you sick up until we found out about germs.
Right.
It was always germs, and they were always wrong about that answer. So making up an answer before we know the real answer doesn't make it temporarily right. It was always wrong. It will remain always wrong, because there's no conspiracy theories in nature that it's just there is a brute fact to the thing. We just don't know what that is.
Yeah, and one of the things that that I read a while ago that really spoke to me is, and I don't remember which theologian formulated this, but it's a paraphrase: all truth is God's truth, wherever it's found. So, like with the germs, that fact was there, we just didn't know it, and pretending that it was something else isn't helpful. And if I, as a person, am trying, struggle with my faith, am trying to find answers, slapping a label on something and saying it had to be God, when I can just be okay with not knowing what it is, it doesn't mean that God doesn't exist.
Right.
It's just, God doesn't have to be the answer for everything. I mean, even if you believe in God, that doesn't mean that, I don't know.
You're right, Jim. Sometimes the answer.
No, I mean, it doesn't. It could have been a God that started it, but he goes on. I'm going to read ahead a little bit.
Go ahead.
It goes on. The universe has a cause is premise 4. Premise 5 is if the universe has a cause, then an uncaused personal creator of the universe exists, who without the universe is beginningless, changeless, immaterial, timeless, spaceless, and enormously powerful.
Did he just take like a huge leap across? I feel like he just did an Evel Knievel across like 7 fiery buses.
Well, over the decades, he has, expanded on it, but it's hard to put it all in. You'd have to pull it from every video or every debate he's ever had. But it equally applies to any other God you can name, to multiple gods. There's no reason that it had to be one instead of 17 on a committee, or ancient aliens.
What if there's a multiverse?
Yeah.
If there's a multiverse, multiple gods, is there one God over all the universes?
Well, if it's the Marvel universe, then yes, there is one, but that's comic books, and we're not talking comic books. Yeah, that's what gets me. It's like this huge leap that happens when you go from, okay, the universe, and I think this is sort of a hallmark of what I would call really bad arguments, is you start off with premises that are like, oh, okay, maybe. Like premise 1 is like, well, I don't know, maybe, and premise 2 is like, maybe. Premise 3, I don't know, maybe. And then it's like, and therefore, Moses is part of the Red Sea, and you're like, wait a second, we went very, very far here, and I don't feel like you put in the effort to get there.
Well, he's added this supernatural thing instead of just, one of the philosophers that talk about a lot, one of my favorite debaters, Matt Dillahunty, talks about is David Hume, who kind of says reject the greater miracle, which isn't the same as saying accept the lesser miracle, but saying that a universe is infinite is a lesser miracle than a God exists, because we know the universe exists. It's already a thing.
Well, we're pretty sure.
So, maybe the universe coming out of nothing, which nobody says, but say that actually was the thing, or somebody formulated that way, that the universe just popped into being out of nothing. That's still a thing that exists. And on the quantum level, again, not a scientist, no idea. I have just heard scientists say that at the quantum level, quarks or whatever it is pop into existence, then pop back out of existence, seemingly at random sometimes. Well, okay. That may be outside of our normal scope of what happens, and it may even be something you could label miraculous, but it doesn't add that extra step. There's not that extra layer of complexity that just doesn't seem to need to be there.
Well, it kind of reminds me of the studies they did about spontaneous generation. And, you'd have the scientists that would have the Petri dishes that were clean, and they'd say, okay, after, 2 weeks, we don't see anything, therefore spontaneous generation can't exist. And it's like, well, what if we did that same experiment with 100 billion scientists on 100 billion different planets over the course of 7 billion years? Would we get the same results? Maybe there are certain laws of the universe that we simply don't understand or don't have access to. And that to me is much to say that, well, science hasn't quite recognized all the laws of the universe yet is much more likely than, you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger is Zeus and, you know, shot the world into existence. That seems to me a bridge much farther than we don't understand everything yet. Because there's lots of things that we didn't understand, and we do understand that. I mean, germ theory, like you talked about germ theory, a whole bunch of other things, you know, all these things, the models of the solar system, the models of the universe. I mean, these things have evolved over time and gotten better.
I don't know should be the default. And then anything that gets added to I don't know, should be observed by many people and reaching the same conclusion. And each layer of thing that you add to I don't know should have a complexity penalty added to it. It should become less probable than I don't know, than nothing. And the God thing, to me, especially from this argument, from the Kalam, seems this giant extra step that I don't know how you even start taking that step without saying, well, the universe might have been infinite. We know that most things that happen have some preceding cause for that, but our knowledge currently runs out at Planck time. Just saying I don't know seems like the most reasonable thing. But
yeah,
Brandon?
I'll be the first to admit I don't know a whole bunch of stuff.
I concur. You don't know about a whole bunch of stuff.
Look, you.
So Brandon, is this a newer take on an older argument?
Yeah, I don't.
So how far back does this go?
The cosmological argument itself, I believe, is Arabic in origins.
Is it
Yeah,
based on that?
medieval Islamic is where it originally started. But the Kalam, the most popular current formulation, starts with William Lane Craig. I think it was actually his thesis, his doctoral thesis.
So one of the things that I find really fascinating about this is that so that was kind of what I gathered, but I didn't really have time to dig into it, because one of the videos was referring to a Islamic philosopher, and I feel like a lot of the Kalam argument is depending on current science, which I find fascinating, because I feel like for me, when I boil it down, it's science says that our universe started at Big Bang, and they don't know what happened before the Big Bang. Therefore, since science has explained this much of the universe and it can't go back further, then God must have done it. But I'm like, well, yeah, but 100 years ago, before we were discussing the Big Bang, you'd still have this same proof that God existed. Now you're just saying, aha, science has shown that the Big Bang created the universe, but God must have been before the Big Bang. Like, to me, it just feels like it doesn't matter what science will show and could show in the past and in the future. God will always be in the whatever science doesn't know, God must have done that.
Well, and saying God did it doesn't really get you anywhere as far as an actual explanation. Have you guys ever seen that music video from OK Go where they have the Rube Goldberg machine, and at the end it like,
yes, I love that.
If I say, how did those TVs get smashed, and you say it's a Rube Goldberg machine, I can't recreate that. It doesn't mean anything. I can come up with 100 different variations on a Rube Goldberg machine that ends up smashing TVs, but it doesn't tell me how it happened just saying that. It's still a complex answer. Saying God did it actually doesn't simplify things at all. I would still want to know how, what specifically did he do. It doesn't break down any further. It's a mostly useless answer as far as human knowledge goes.
By the way, next week, Brandon is going to do at least 5 Rube Goldberg machines that destroy television. So be sure to tune in. So this is kind of the portion where I wanted to discuss something that, I've talked about a little bit before when we talked about our debate stuff. And I do not know Mr. Craig, but I do know some people that say some of the same things he does. And I would like to talk about disingenuousness. Jim kind of talks about this, and it's very true. The idea that, we have the scientific knowledge increasing, and the Christian apologetics simply trying to expand to encompass as much of the scientific knowledge that they can and still come to the same conclusion. Now, some people, and maybe Mr. Craig is this person, I'm not sure. I don't want to, put words in his mouth or anything. Some of those people probably believe that, but I do also think there's a certain number of people, especially online, and we all know what a great world online is, who don't believe it, who are just saying these things, who will say anything, just because they are trying to further their argument. They're trying to win an argument. They're trying to win, brownie points or something else on Twitter or Facebook or somewhere else. And when you are somebody who doesn't actually care about the facts or any of the stuff involved, then it becomes virtually impossible to debate somebody on that, because they legitimately don't care about the result. They just care about sort of continuing the argument. Again, like I said, clarifying, I'm not sure whether William Craig is that person or not, but there are certainly people like that out there. And Brandon, what do you think about that? People that are just arguing disingenuously on things like this.
Yeah, there's a guy named Innuendo Studios that put out an entire series called The Alt-Right Playbook, and he talks a lot about that. It's continuing the argument. It's short, quippy, wrong phrases that takes the other side an entire hour to explain why they're wrong. And meanwhile, he's saying something confident. Even though it's wrong, he's saying something with confidence and then moving on to the next point. All the audience is going to remember is the easy to digest, quick answer that was said confidently, while some nerd stood up and, tried to explain in complicated detail why that was wrong. Nobody's going to remember that. William Lane Craig is not that. He has more intellectual integrity than that, but.
And that's why I didn't want to say that was him, but I do know a lot of people that do that. And it is.
I think of the apologists that I have listened to, he might have the most integrity, but at the same time, he also has this statement of faith that he says, if in some historically contingent context, the evidence that he has for Christianity should turn against him, he doesn't think that would contravene the witness of the Holy Spirit, I think is what he says. So.
Jim, you're not online, I think, as much as some of the rest of us are. You kind of avoid that stuff to some degree. Is that right?
This is probably the most online thing I do.
So you haven't had that same experience of arguing with disingenuous.
Why would you choose this?
Okay, we know your experience online. We'll get to you in just a moment.
So no, I think one of the reasons I chose early on to stay offline is I saw people that I knew who, if I was with them, like people I knew each other, and I had seen them have discussions about politics, religion, etc., public policy, and have a disagreement, be able to talk about it, and see them engage online and just torch each other and not completely talk past each other, red herrings, etc. I'm like, how is this helpful? This is just, number one, this is damaging for their relationship with each other. Number two, like, it just makes me feel ill. I just decided early on, I don't need it. So I'm done with that for the most part.
I didn't make that decision, and you were the right one.
Well, that happens more often than you know.
Well, let's not get carried away. So, Kale, online, you don't really talk. I don't think you talk on Facebook about religion particularly often, do you? So you haven't
I
had
don't
the
think so.
you haven't had the experience. You've had the experience of arguing with people for a lot of things, but not necessarily with
I
this.
have a meme of that Russian guy that always tests all the guns, even though we don't like guns. And like, there's a meme where he's got like some big anti-aircraft gun with the big fucking legs out and everything. And it's like, it's
For home
like,
defense, right?
yeah,
Galvatron
it's
for home defense.
my Christian friends, and he's like, it's like blasphemous memes, and he's loading them into the giant gun, and he starts shooting the gun. Like, that's what I do. I'm an asshole. I'm sorry. I can't help it. No, I can't help it. But I do it. And I'm really, really, really trying to be a kind person. And that's the thing. That's my problem with the concept in the first place, is that you think that you have to have this parent figure up in the sky that's going to punish you for not being a fucking kind person. If Why do you need that? Are you just that shitty of a person that you can't just be a kind person without the threat of punishment?
I think that actually gets into the moral argument for God, if we want to continue this series on apologetics.
And if we don't, I apologize.
I hope we do, because I'm going to cover this board. I am covering this board.
Kale has a board right there.
I have a freaking board.
Him. He's over there. Over there. Yeah, I don't know. I think I understand the sort of academics behind it to some degree. I mean, I'm not an academic, but I get it. But I also find all the arguments weak, and I find a lot of little jumps to get to places that he seems to already want to go. I mean, that's the thing that bothers me, I think, the most about this. And I kind of forgot about this when I was watching the videos. He clearly wants to get somewhere. Now, again, he may be an intellectual and he may be smart, but he's not just setting all the evidence out on a table and saying, okay, where does all this lead to? No, he wants it to lead to God.
Yeah, he starts with his conclusion.
It's deductive. It starts here and works its way backwards. And that will always be a little bit intellectually dishonest. Now, it doesn't mean he's going to be wrong. I mean, you can do that, and sometimes you're right. Sometimes your conclusion is correct. But it does mean that you're not giving equal weight to all evidence. And if you're not giving equal weight to all evidence, then you're just not being intellectually honest.
Yep. I think that's a great point.
Or do you have any kind of final thoughts on this one? I think we covered this one pretty well.
I don't know that I have any specific final thoughts. One thing that I did want to add, you talked about a divine architect, and I think maybe I've said this in a previous podcast, but it made me think of my dad. And so I just wanted to say that one of the little snarky joys my dad took was occasionally saying Masonic prayers at Catholic events. And getting away with it, oh, divine architect of the universe, kind of stuff. Yeah.
Well, with all respect to my Catholic friends, a lot of them probably don't know the difference. Catholics aren't super familiar with the Bible.
That's a great point.
Kale, aside from Monty Python references, do you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah,
the holy hand grenade. What's that, Cal?
Being kind is good, and you don't need to be threatened to be punished to be kind. And just because something isn't what you thought it was doesn't mean you have to be angry at it.
That's my secret, Kale. I'm always angry at everyone.
You're the Hulk.
I don't know. I guess my final thoughts are allow yourself to be led by the evidence and not by people trying to lead you somewhere. And sometimes it's incredibly difficult, especially when you're talking about really deep scientific concepts. I mean, it's tough. It's tough to keep up on all that stuff. There's a lot of good people. I think Neil deGrasse Tyson does a pretty good job of breaking down sort of complex scientific ideas so that they're a little more digestible. Skeptics Guide to the Universe, I think, is pretty good. Sometimes they're a little more tactical than maybe they should be, but I think there are people out there, good thought leaders out there that can tell you about these things in a way that's more digestible, and stay on that path. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't believe in God or can't believe in God or anything like that. Some of our best friends and wives are very devout religious people. It just means, I guess my biggest advice would be deeds. Deeds are incredibly important. Be good people. Because if you're a good person and you have bad thoughts, people will still like you. But if you have good thoughts and do bad things, people won't like you. And it's about as simple as that.
Doesn't matter if people like you. It matters if you do good.
Well, I don't like you. Brandon, why don't you close this out?
Yeah.
I find this stuff endlessly fascinating. I've listened to a lot of debates involving Christian apologetics, and from here they do get, I would say, more sophisticated and or slightly more irritating. But they are fascinating, and the untangling of them, I think, is one of my favorite things to listen to while I'm doing nothing else or while I'm at work or whatever. But it's okay to not know something, and it's certainly okay to bow to the consensus of experts in the relevant field. Nobody, including PhD level scientists, knows everything about every field. As their knowledge grows about their very specific field, it actually becomes more and more narrow and more focused. And they have to spend a lot of time doing that. And that means that a lot of knowledge that they might have about something else kind of goes by the wayside because that field is also moving along. People who haven't been to college, who haven't spent the time in this classroom, butts in the chair, doing the work and doing the studying, just isn't going to know as much. And even if one person did spend all that time, if they're going against the consensus of the relevant experts in the field, they're automatically wrong. Consensus builds knowledge. One person is not going to overturn an entire theory. So, like, Roger Penrose is a brilliant guy. But if what he's saying goes against consensus, it's okay to just ignore him. It's also okay to just point to consensus. If you say, well, I think I can debunk evolution in 6 easy steps, well, you're automatically wrong. You can't. Just go with consensus. It's easier. You'll be much higher probable chance of being right.
I would just like to preface that by saying, or well, not preface, it would be the opposite of that. By saying Brandon is talking about scientific consensus. When it comes to political consensus, you don't have to follow political consensus at all, because that's usually horse shit. But that being said, I think, oh, I'm sorry. Do you have something else you want to say?
No, you're right. Scientific consensus, yeah.
But that being said, we want to thank everybody for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Be good to each other, and have a good drink, and have a good night.
Come on, we're sorry, okay?